Apparently, NFL teams this offseason didn't get the memo. It's free agency time, not the NFL trade deadline. My God, you couldn't tell. You got some big time blockbuster trades going on, something that you very rarely see at the NFL level, in particular when it involves big time names and big time players switching teams in the same deal. Usually you'll see a trade for a big time player involving draft picks or moves up and down draft boards with draft picks being traded, but very rare is it where you'll see a star player traded for a star player, throwing some picks in. But we got one of those again here with the Seattle Seahawks sending their quality center Max Unger and their first round pick, the 31st overall selection in this year's draft, to the New Orleans Saints for Jimmy Graham and a fourth round pick. Wow. You want to talk about a big time deal here. This is definitely a sort of a version of a blockbuster. And the crazy thing about this particular trade is I get it from both sides. I understand it for both sides. And frankly, I like the deal for both sides. When I look at it from the Seattle Seahawks standpoint first, look, part of the reason you could point to the fact that the Seahawks didn't win the Super Bowl this year is the fact that around Russell Wilson, outside of Marshawn Lynch, they had nothing in terms of offensive weapons. Absolutely nothing. Once they traded off Percy Harvin early in the season to the New York Jets, what in the bluest of blue hells did the Seattle Seahawks have? I mean, they're sitting there trotting out formerly undrafted wide receivers like Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse and Ricardo Lockett. You saw the results of what happened when you roll out in big games with those type of lack of quality wide receivers on the outside, especially once Paul Richardson went down with the ACL injury. Those guys couldn't get open. They couldn't separate. They couldn't make any type of real impact or any type of big time plays. The Seahawks so desperately needed this type of playmaking option for Russell Wilson in that offense, in that passing attack. And they've now got it. From the Seahawks standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to give up that 31st overall pick and to give up Max Unger. Look, draft picks are valuable commodities, but who in the hell were you going to draft at number 31 that was going to be as good of a player as Jimmy Graham? Let's be honest. Furthermore, when you're looking at Max Unger, no disrespect to him, but it's a lot easier to find a really good center than it is a big-time all-pro caliber tight end, a big-time difference maker like a Jimmy Graham at the tight end position. When in doubt, you're going to side with the tight end over the center, or at least you should if you were any type of sane thinking individual. This deal makes a lot of sense for the Seattle Seahawks. This is where they reap the rewards of drafting well over the years and putting themselves in a really advantageous salary cap situation. Sure, they still have to get Russell Wilson re-signed, and re-sign him they will to a big-time deal. But that because of their ability to build from within, to build through the draft, to be able to re-sign these players before they hit the open market, what they've allowed themselves to do is create a situation where they have a lot of stars on one side of the ball, and they still have a lot of salary cap space where they can sit there and make this type of big time move. Now, I find it very interesting that a little over almost 2 years after they made the big deal for Percy Harvin to be this type of guy and then got rid of him, they're willing to go back down this road again. But the fact of the matter is Jimmy Graham, best I know, doesn't have a reputation for fighting his teammates. He doesn't have a reputation for being nearly the type of level of jackass that a Percy Harvin is. You're looking at a Jimmy Graham that is frankly a better player than a Percy Harvin is. So again, and when you look at the fact of what they had to give up and what they got in return, this wasn't quite the same type of deal as what the Seahawks did when they went and got Percy Harvin. This is a much better deal. And the fact they still got a fourth round pick in return as well. Those are the type of mid-round picks the Seattle Seahawks have done really well with over the years. Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman were once fifth-round picks. Just think about that for a second. It's also interesting to me, too, that now Jimmy Graham is going to be practicing against the Legion of Boom defense, who has gone out of their way in the past to talk about how soft he is and how easy he is to take out of the game once you get him physical. It's very interesting to me. But from the New Orleans Saints standpoint, I understand some of the Saints fans might be questioning this deal and wondering what's going on here. Well, the simple fact of the matter is you're not going anywhere anytime soon. And also, the simple fact of the matter is you're about as relevant as long as Drew Brees is still playing. Drew Brees is the man. You're not going to ask him to take a huge pay cut. You're not going to sit there and cut him because once you cut Drew Brees or Drew Brees goes away, who the fuck cares about the New Orleans Saints? Period. It's that simple. Drew Brees is the identity of that organization. When you look at a Saints team that has drafted very poorly in recent years, and in particular, you look at their current salary cap situation, and you realize just how bad off they are, they had to make this type of move where they could clear out some salary cap space. They had to find a way to get some better draft pick currency because this is a team that is in bad, desperate need of draft pick currency, of some young, cheap talent that could come in and make an impact around Drew Brees. So they get that here. It's also more important for the New Orleans Saints to have that offensive line protection in front of Drew Brees because one of their biggest bugaboos over the past couple of years has been the consistent inability of that Saints offensive line to pass protect effectively in front of Drew Brees. Whereas with the Seahawks, yeah, it's kind of important, a guy like an Unger, but you could get by with that because Lynch is a freaking beast anyways running up the middle, no matter who you've got blocking for him. And Russell Wilson, the type of mobile athletic quarterback that he is, having that type of center just is a bit of a luxury. It's not necessarily a necessity. Having a big-time weapon on the outside like Jimmy Graham is a necessity. For the Saints, though, having that type of offensive lineman, that anchor in the middle of that line, I think is more of a necessity than a Jimmy Graham is. At the end of the day, that Saints system, it's about the arrogance and confidence in that system, that belief that you have enough weapons, you still have Drew Brees, you can make it work, you can get the job done, and perhaps they can. But they also have the chance here with having the 13th pick and the 31st pick in this year's draft. They have the chance, the Saints do, to really affect some positive change for their organization long term to perhaps get ready to prepare for themselves for life after Drew Brees. They can sit there now and maybe peel back a little bit from 13. They are especially primed where they're picking at with pick number 31. If they've got a team desperate enough to move up, either you take that and turn it into a first-round pick next year, you're able to turn it into a second and third-round pick, therefore picking up an additional day 2 pick, which again is incredibly valuable, and NFL teams want that type of flexibility. And again, for a team like the Saints, who are in such a bad position salary cap-wise, they need younger, cheaper talent, and the best way to get that is through what, ladies and gentlemen? The NFL draft. The Saints weren't going anywhere with Jimmy Graham, so they can just be just as fine not going anywhere without Jimmy Graham. The Seattle Seahawks are primed to contend now and contend right away. And as a result, they needed a big-time difference maker. They needed to get it right like they didn't do 2 years ago in the most part when they went for Percy Harvin. Now with Jimmy Graham, it looks like they could do that. And again, they didn't just get Jimmy Graham. They also got a 4th-round pick. We could talk about all that all you want, but those are valuable picks. Those are incredibly valuable commodities. And for a team like the Seahawks, who does a pretty good job of drafting in the middle rounds under the John Schneider, Pete Carroll regime, that 4th-round pick could end up being a bit of a gold mine here as well. So I look at the Seahawks, and I think they've got to be very happy with themselves, and they got to look at themselves as big-time winners because they got what they needed. They got something that they weren't going to get out of this draft. They got that big-time playmaking tight end that they so desperately needed. However, it's going to be important to see for a guy like Jimmy Graham, who's really not much of a run blocker, how he's going to be utilized in that power running attack offense of the Seattle Seahawks. Is this going to be another example of a bit of a square peg in a round hole? Is this going to be another example where offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell can't figure out how to utilize a guy with these type of skills, similar to how it didn't seem like he could figure out how to properly utilize Percy Harvin? And then from the Saints standpoint, we could talk about the system. You could talk about bringing Colston back. You'll have Cooks coming back from injury. You have Kenny Stills on the outside. You have guys at the tight end position that sometimes could do something in a role. And you still have Drew Brees. And you have an improved offensive line with Max Unger in the middle. You still lost Jimmy Graham. You lost that beast. And no offense to Marcus Colston or Brandon Cooks. They're not beasts. Jimmy Graham is a beast as a pass-catching weapon. Of course, unless you get in his face to get physical with him, then you can take him out of the game. But if you can't do that, Jimmy Graham can dominate. And Jimmy Graham is a real, true difference maker, one of the elite weapons on offense in all of the National Football League. Those type of guys just don't grow on trees. And they're not easy to replace. One thing I can say in the defense of the Saints, though, is this is the same Jimmy Graham. For all we could talk about him and all we could sing his praises, this is once a guy that was coming out of the U as a 3rd-round pick that was a former basketball player that a lot of people weren't sure of. And a lot of people most certainly didn't envision him becoming this type of guy. So maybe the Saints on the offensive side of the ball know what they're doing, and they could find that type of guy. Maybe in the 2nd round they'll draft a guy from the U like Clive Walford. Who knows? We'll find out. Only time will tell. But this is one of these situations where I like this deal for both sides. It makes sense for both sides, and I can argue for it for both sides. Was there really a clear-cut winner? Maybe the Seahawks just a little bit, just because of the fact of the position of what they're in right now and what Jimmy Graham brings them to the table and how much more important that is than what Max Unger brought to the table. Furthermore, losing that first-round pick for the Seahawks isn't nearly as important as it is gaining it for the New Orleans Saints. But the Saints made out pretty well, too. They got improvement big time in the middle of that offensive line that they badly needed, and they got some additional draft pick currency that, again, they badly needed. A good deal, in my opinion, for both parties.